Good morning to everybody. This is your boy Yuckmouth. Today is the date of 9/11. Um, I'm gonna sit back with you and just hear some audio about the event. So just sit back and relax.
On September the 11th, 2001, terrorist organization Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 US passenger planes. 2 were flown into the Twin Towers, another was flown into the Pentagon, and the final jet crashed in Pennsylvanian farmland. Altogether, 2,996 people were killed and 6,000 were injured. In 2004, the US government published the 9/11 Commission Report, but the 28-page chapter on foreign support for the September 11 hijackers was classified. It was finally released in July 2016. Did it confirm suspicions that Saudi Arabian elites masterminded 9/11? And why did the US keep the chapter secret for so long? The official US stance is that Al-Qaeda acted without support from the royal Al Saud family, but senior members of the inquiry insist that the report proves otherwise. Senator Bob Graham co-chaired the Intelligence Committee that wrote the report. In 2015, he said, "The 28 pages refer primarily to who financed 9/11, and they point a very strong finger at Saudi Arabia." To many, such as best-selling writer Alan Mitchum, these comments were obvious. After all, 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. In 2015, arrested 9/11 plotter Zacarias Moussaoui swore under oath that Saudi royals were major Al-Qaeda donors. The same year, WikiLeaks released a diplomatic cable from then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to the US Treasury. It stated, "Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial support base for Al-Qaeda." Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York in 2001, revealed that he had been offered $10 million by a Saudi prince to kill suspicions of Saudi involvement in 9/11. The US has a long-standing diplomatic relationship with Saudi Arabia, but more unsettling is the personal relationship between President George Bush and the Al Sauds. Journalist Craig Unger writes, "Never before has an American president been so closely tied to a foreign power that harbors and supports our country's mortal enemies." Its investigation shows that the Al Sauds received military protection from the Bushes in exchange for lucrative oil deals. Did Bush redact the 28 pages to protect his friends and personal interests? Saudi Arabia holds $750 billion worth of American assets, which they've previously threatened to sell in order to sway US lawmaking. The declassified 28 pages suggest that Washington, D.C.'s Saudi embassy had strong links to Al-Qaeda. Bomb maker Ghassan al-Shabi was trained to fly airplanes for the 9/11 missions, but never made the cut. In 2016, US officials admitted that they discovered his flight certificate hidden at the Saudi embassy. Many commentators, such as New York Post columnist Paul Sperry, drew links to then ambassador to the US, Prince Bandar, as well as showing evidence that Bandar funded 2 of the hijackers using a third party. The declassified report exposes a horrifying link between Bandar and Al-Qaeda strongman Abu Zubaydah. Zubaydah's phone book included a number traced to an unregistered Colorado company, the Aspcol Corporation. The FBI stopped investigating the company in 2002, officially because it would become quickly known to Prince Bandar's employees. The prince had a $49 million hideaway in Colorado at the time. Another number in his book was linked to a Saudi embassy employee whose personal business was funded by the brother of former Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. Phone records show that the two were in regular contact, with Abdullah bin Laden even given as the emergency contact for the embassy workers' children. No CIA or FBI source has ever commented on the alarming number of links between the Saudi embassy and the 9/11 hijackers. Yet, the declassified report provides no solid proof that the Saudis financed or even supported the 9/11 attacks. Journalist Andrew Bowen writes that, at a stretch, there may be reasonable doubt that some Saudis did engage in financing such groups, But as for official government involvement in 9/11, there's frankly no evidence. The 9/11 Commission itself concluded that there was no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior Saudi officials individually funded al-Qaeda. While links between high-ranking Saudis and al-Qaeda should not be dismissed, of the 585 pages of the report, the classified 28 were part of an early CIA and FBI investigation following up all 9/11 leads. As CIA Director John Brennan stated before the release, the 28 pages were a preliminary review that put information in there that was not corroborated, not vetted, and not deemed to be accurate. Given the huge scale of the 9/11 lobby and the enthusiasm with which US authorities usually detain, managed to kill almost 3,000 people. This is the 9/11 hijackings declassified. On that day, American Airlines Flight 11 took off at 7:59 a.m. from Boston Logan Airport, headed to Los Angeles. United Airlines Flight 175, also bound for LA, took off 15 minutes later at 8:14. Around that time, 5 hijackers took control of American 11, which crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46. United 175 was hijacked by 5 terrorists at around 8:42 and crashed into the South Tower at 9:03. At Washington's Dulles Airport, American 77 took off at 8:09. The hijack began at 8:51, and at 9:37 the plane hit the west side of the Pentagon at roughly 530 miles per hour. Finally, at New York's Newark Airport, United 93 took off at 8:42. 4 terrorists began the hijacking at 9:28, but around half an hour later, the passengers revolted. United 93 crashed in farmland in Pennsylvania at 10:03. Everyone on board all 4 planes, including the terrorists themselves, were killed instantly upon impact. The attacks had been planned for over 5 years. The mastermind behind 9/11 was a Kuwaiti man called Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM, who was already known to US law enforcement. KSM decided that an attack like the 1993 World Trade Center bombings was too risky. Instead, he developed the idea to train pilots to crash into buildings. In 1996, KSM met with Osama bin Laden, leader of the militant extremist group al-Qaeda, to propose the attacks. KSM originally envisaged a total of 10 planes, 9 of which would be crashed into targets across America, with himself landing the final plane. Early plans also considered hijacking American planes and flying them into US targets in Japan or Korea, but this idea was dropped in 2000. By 1999, bin Laden had chosen 4 operatives to lead the operation: Khalid al-Mida, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Abu Bara al-Yemeni, and Tawfiq bin Attash. All attended training camps in Afghanistan in autumn 1999. 3 of the 4 went for additional training in basic English, reading airline timetables, making travel reservations, renting apartments, and using code words. In one instance, Attash even tested carrying weapons onto a plane, an international flight between Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur. The box cutter in his toiletry bag was never discovered by security. In addition to the initial 4, al-Qaeda recruited 4 men residing in Germany to assist with the plot. Unlike the original 4, Mohammed Atta, Ramzi bin Ashib, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah were all fluent in English and had experience of living in the West. Known as the Hamburg contingent, they began researching flight schools. In January 2000, Hamzi and Mida flew to the US to start flight training and learn English. However, their lack of language skills was a severe hindrance. Their flying tutors said that they were poor students who didn't really pay attention during landing or takeoffs. They were only interested in controlling the plane in the air. By May 2000, both gave up learning to fly. The Hamburg contingent arrived in the US in the summer of 2000. However, bin al-Shib had been unable to obtain a visa and was forced to drop out of the attacks. A 4th pilot, Hani Hanjour, who had previously obtained his pilot's license in the US, was recruited. By August, the remaining 3 from Hamburg were flying passenger aircraft on simulators. In addition to the 4 pilots, al-Qaeda also recruited 15 muscle hijackers from Afghanistan. They were a mixed group, none of whom had any more than a high school education. Some of them weren't even devout Muslims and regularly drank alcohol. The muscle hijackers weren't told of the full plan in case they were caught before it was carried out. In May 2001, one of the Hamburg contingent and another unidentified man were spotted at Boston's Logan Airport. They were seen videotaping and photographing the security checkpoints. Despite the federal government warning that Al-Qaeda often conducted surveillance like this before an attack, no action was taken and the men were allowed to board their plane. Logan Airport also didn't have any security cameras installed at the security checkpoints, so pictures of the men were never taken. At least 2 of the hijackers were also being watched by the CIA and were put on terror watch lists. On September the 11th at Logan Airport, 10 hijackers went through security to board planes American 11 and United 175, the ones that would hit the Twin Towers. Out of the 10 men, only one, Mohammed Atta, was subjected to a computerized pre-screening process. This process just involved holding his luggage off the plane until he was confirmed to be aboard. All 10 hijackers passed through metal detectors too, but none of the security staff remember their checks being particularly unusual. In Washington, 4 of the 5 hijackers on the American 77 set off metal detectors. 3 set it off twice and had to be passed over with a metal detector wand. But they were still allowed to board their plane. One member of the group, Nawaf al-Hazmi, also had his bag swiped by an explosive trace detector. He passed onto the plane, despite there being an unidentified object in his back pocket. In Newark, the lack of CCTV means there is no evidence of the terrorists even passing through security. Furthermore, all hijackers had to pass their hand luggage through an X-ray machine, but none of their bags set off the machines, despite the fact that they had knives and box cutters in there. It was these weapons, along with mace, that enabled the hijackings to take place. On each plane, the hijackers forced their way into the cockpit, stabbing anyone in their way. They used mace to force all the passengers into the back of the plane. Many passengers in coach didn't realize they were being hijacked. They just thought there was a medical emergency. On American 11, flight attendants Betty Ong and Madeline Sweeney managed to contact the American Airlines reservation office in North Carolina. Using the onboard phone, Ong and Sweeney reported that 2 flight attendants had been stabbed and that the hijackers claimed to have a bomb on board. On American 11, the terrorists tried to use the onboard radio but mistakenly contacted air traffic control with the message, "We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We are returning to the airport." Crucially, air traffic control misheard the first sentence. On United 175, some passengers were also able to make phone calls to loved ones, and some of them reported that passengers were considering storming the cockpit. On the American 77, several passengers called their families and reported the hijacking, including Barbara Olson, who was married to the Solicitor General Theodore Olson. The United 93 left Newark Airport 25 minutes late, taking off at 8:42. It was only at 9:03 that the Boston Flight Center realized American 11 had reported, "We have some planes." At this point, the Federal Aviation Administration understood there were multiple hijackings, and at 9:07, the FAA controllers at the Boston Center requested that the command center tell all airborne aircraft to increase security in the cockpit. There is no evidence that Herndon did this. Several FAA senior officers stated that it was not the FAA's place to tell airlines what to tell their pilots. As a result, American Airlines didn't warn any of their aircraft about extra cockpit security. Unlike the other planes, there were only 4 terrorists on board United 93. Passengers called loved ones during the event and reported that some of the passengers were voting on whether to storm the cockpit. It happened, and the passenger revolt was so strong that the hijackers attempted to roll the plane violently left and right to knock them off balance. When the passengers breached the cockpit, the terrorists crashed the plane. We presume they intended to hit the White House or the Capitol building, but thanks to the bravery of the passengers on United 93, this didn't happen. 9/11 was the most horrific terrorist attack on US soil in history, and the hijackings themselves could have gone very differently were it not for a series of mistakes and missed opportunities by law enforcement. This is just the first of several videos in which we'll look at the different stages of the events surrounding 9/11, so please stay tuned to this channel for
It's probably the worst day, one of the worst days in American history, 9/11. A lot of people lost their lives. So I take a moment of silence to respect those that sacrifice their lives to save other people. This is your boy Yuck Mouth. I guess I'll catch up with y'all later. Peace.